Polish your brother's shoes, Maya. It's the only thing you're good for anyway, my mother hissed, her voice dripping with a contempt I'd felt since the day she married Richard. I looked at the expensive leather boots Colton had tossed at my feet. Then I looked my mother in the eye and said one word: no. The next thing I felt was the stinging heat of her palm across my face. The slap was so hard it sent me stumbling back against the wall. Before I could even catch my breath, she grabbed my arm, dragged me to the front door, and shoved me out into the freezing midnight storm. "Don't come back until you learn your place," she screamed, slamming the door and locking it. I stood there in the pouring rain, soaked to the bone with only $14 in my pocket, watching the lights of my own home go dark. That was 5 years ago. Today, the rain is gone, but the coldness in my heart has only grown sharper. I am standing in the foyer of a five-star hotel ballroom in downtown Chicago, attending my mother's 10th anniversary gala. I'm not the broken girl who left in the rain. I'm wearing a $2,000 tailored suit, and my presence has just turned this $100,000 party into a morgue. 50 of the city's elite have stopped talking. The clinking of crystal glasses has ceased. My mother, Eleanor, is frozen at the head of the table, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. Beside her, Colton, the golden boy who watched me get slapped and laughed, looks like he's just seen a ghost from a nightmare. I haven't said a word yet. I don't have to. I just walk forward, my heels clicking against the marble floor with a rhythm that feels like a death march for their reputation. I am holding a thick manila folder under my arm. To them, it looks like a business report. To me, it's the legal evidence that will dismantle every lie they've used to build this fake, luxurious life. They threw me out like trash, thinking I would disappear into the gutters of the city. They didn't realize that when you strip a person of everything, you give them the freedom to become anything. And I became the person who now owns the debt on the very roof over their heads. The room is frozen because they know the reckoning has finally arrived, and I'm not here to forgive. I'm here to collect. Before I show you exactly what is inside this folder and how it turned my mother's face from arrogant to terrified in 10 seconds, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been the disposable person in your family? The one they blamed for everything while the golden child got all the praise? If you've ever had to build your own life from the ashes of a betrayal, hit that like button right now. It helps this story find other women who are still sitting in the rain wondering if they'll ever be enough. And if you're new here, subscribe and join our community. I read every single comment. So tell me, what was the moment you realized your family didn't have your back? Eleanor thinks she can just ignore me, or maybe call security to throw me out again, but she hasn't noticed the man standing near the entrance, my lead attorney, or the fact that the hotel manager just bowed to me as I walked in. 5 years is a long time to keep a secret. It's 1,825 days of counting every dollar, tracking every forged signature, and documenting every cent they stole from my late father's estate to fund Colton's failed businesses. My mother once told me I had the hands of a servant. Tonight, she's going to learn that those same hands signed the papers that are about to take everything from her. She's staring at me, trying to find a trace of the girl she slapped, but that girl died in the storm 5 years ago. This version of me is a stranger to her, and that is her biggest mistake. To understand why this folder is a tactical nuke, I have to take you back to the beginning, to the day Richard and Colton moved in and the garage became my bedroom while my mother looked the other way. The erosion of my life didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, agonizing drip. It started 7 years ago, shortly after my father passed. My mother, Eleanor, didn't wait for the grass to grow over his grave before she introduced us to Richard Vance. He was a logistics manager with an expensive watch and a son named Colton who looked at our modest suburban house like it was a dirty napkin he was forced to use. Within 6 months, they were married, and we were moving into Richard's sprawling ranch-style house on Sycamore Court in a high-end Chicago suburb. I remember the day we moved in vividly. Colton was 19, a year younger than me, but he acted like he owned the horizon. As we stood in the pristine foyer, Richard pointed upward. "Colton, the suite at the end of the hall is yours. It's got the balcony and the walk-in closet." Then my mother turned to me, her voice lacking the warmth she used to have when my father was alive. "Maya, honey, there is a finished room in the basement. It's quiet and you'll have your own space. You're so independent, right?" The finished room was a corner of the basement next to the HVAC unit and the water heater. There was no drywall, just exposed studs and plastic sheeting that rustled every time the furnace kicked on. My mattress was a thin, twin-sized foam pad on the concrete floor. At night, the pipes above me would groan and gurgle every time Colton or Richard used the master bathroom upstairs. It smelled of mildew and old cardboard. While Colton's room was filled with the latest gaming consoles and designer furniture, my independence consisted of a single clamp lamp from a dollar store and a cardboard box for a nightstand. The disparity was sickening. Colton was given a brand new SUV for his 20th birthday despite barely graduating high school. I was driving a beat-up sedan with a cracked windshield that I'd bought with my own savings. One evening, I came home after a double shift at a diner, exhausted and smelling like grease. I sat at the kitchen island to grab a glass of water. Richard looked at me with a sneer and said, "Eleanor, don't you think the staff should eat in the kitchen, not at the bar?" My mother didn't defend me. She just nodded and said, "Maya, go downstairs. You're making the room smell like a fry cook." I stayed quiet because I was counting. I was counting the months until I could finish my degree and the dollars I was tucking away in a secret account they knew nothing about. I was the one who noticed when the bills were late because Richard was spending money on Colton's failed startup ideas. I was the one who saw the forged signatures on the equity line of credit my mother was cashing. I was the invisible one, the one who saw everything while they were too busy admiring their own reflections. But the quietest person in the room is usually the one who knows the most, and I was learning exactly how to dismantle the house they were building on my father's legacy. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday night in May, exactly 5 years ago. It was the night before Colton's big interview for an internship at a top-tier investment firm, an internship Richard had essentially bought for him through a golfing buddy. The house was buzzing with a frantic energy. My mother was fluttering around Colton like he was a king preparing for a coronation, steaming his silk ties and fussing over his hair. I had just come home from my night class, carrying a stack of textbooks, my head thumping with a migraine. "Maya," my mother called out from the living room. Her voice had that sharp, commanding tone she saved exclusively for me. I walked into the room, and there sat Colton on the leather sofa, his legs crossed, looking at his phone. In front of him, on the white rug, were his expensive Italian leather boots. They were scuffed and dull. "Colton needs these polished for tomorrow," Eleanor said, handing me a tin of black wax and a rag. "He's too busy reviewing his notes. Be a doll and get these shining. You have the hands for it anyway." I stood there looking at the boots, then at my mother. "I have a final exam tomorrow morning, Mom," I said, my voice low and steady. "Colton has hands. He can polish his own shoes." The silence that followed was heavy. Colton didn't even look up from his phone, but a smirk crept across his face. He knew what was coming. He loved the theater of my mother putting me in my place. "Don't be difficult, Maya," Richard barked from the hallway. "We provide you with a roof over your head. The least you can do is help your brother. It's not like your little community college exams actually matter compared to this." My mother stepped closer to me. The scent of her expensive perfume was suffocating. "Polish the shoes, Maya, now. It's the only thing you're actually good for in this house. You're lucky we even let you sleep in the basement." "No," I said. It was the first time I had ever said it with that much finality. "I am not his servant, and I am not your maid. If he wants clean shoes, he can do the work himself." The slap was so sudden and so violent that I didn't even see it coming. The sound of her palm hitting my cheek echoed through the open-concept living room. My head snapped to the side, and for a second my vision went blurry. I could feel the heat radiating from my skin, a perfect stinging outline of her hand. I looked up and I saw Colton. He wasn't shocked. He was laughing, a small, silent snicker as he watched his mother strike his sister. "How dare you?" Eleanor hissed, her face contorted with a rage I had never seen. "How dare you speak to me that way after everything I've sacrificed to give you this life? If you can't be a part of this family, then you don't belong under this roof. She grabbed my arm, the grip was like iron, and dragged me toward the front door. I tried to pull back, but Richard stepped in, his hand on my shoulder, pushing me forward. He opened the heavy oak door. Outside, the sky had opened up. It was a torrential Chicago downpour, the kind that turns the world gray and cold in seconds. "Wait," I managed to shout. "My books, my laptop." "You don't need books where you're going," Richard said with a cold grin. My mother grabbed my canvas tote bag from the hall table, the bag that held my wallet and a single sweater, and threw it out onto the wet driveway. Then she shoved me. I stumbled, my sneakers slipping on the wet porch, and landed hard on the gravel. "Don't come back until you've learned to respect the people who feed you," Eleanor screamed. She slammed the door and I heard the heavy deadbolt click into place. I sat there in the mud, the rain soaking through my thin t-shirt in seconds. The lights in the living room flickered off, one by one, until the house was just a dark silhouette against the storm. I reached into my pocket, $14. That's what my dignity was worth that night. $14 and a face that felt like it was on fire. I stood up, picked up my soaked bag, and started walking. I didn't look back. I knew that if I looked back, I might break, and I couldn't afford to break. I had to build. That first night in the rain wasn't just a departure, it was a funeral for the girl I used to be. I spent the first 6 hours sitting in a 24-hour laundromat on 4th Street, shivering under a single heat lamp watching my clothes tumble in a dryer I'd paid for with my last few quarters. Every time the machine thudded, it felt like my mother's hand hitting my face all over again. $14. That's what I had left. I realized then that if I was going to survive, I had to stop crying and start counting. I spent the next 2 years living in a studio apartment that was barely larger than a walk-in closet, located in a part of the city where the police sirens never stopped. The walls were paper thin, and the carpet smelled like decades of regret. But it was mine. No one could slap me there. No one could tell me I was a servant. I worked 3 jobs. I was a waitress at a Greasy Spoon diner from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., a data entry clerk from 2 to 7 p.m., and I spent my nights cleaning offices in the high-rise buildings downtown. While I was scrubbing the mahogany desks of CEOs at 2 in the morning, I wasn't just cleaning. I was studying. I would look at the documents they left behind, the investment reports, the legal briefs, and the organizational charts. I realized that the people who ran the world weren't smarter than me. They just had a head start. I enrolled in night school for corporate law and finance, using every cent of my tips to pay for textbooks. My mother and Richard thought I'd be crawling back to their basement within a month, begging for a chance to polish Colton's shoes again. They didn't realize that I was becoming the person who would eventually own the shoes they walked in. The quiet reckoning began in my 3rd year. I stopped eating out, I stopped buying clothes, and I moved every extra dollar into a high-risk, high-reward investment portfolio I'd built based on what I was learning in my law classes. I became a ghost to my former life. I blocked their numbers, but I kept an eye on their social media from a fake account. I watched as Colton started a logistics firm with a $1 million loan Richard took out against the house. I watched Eleanor post photos of their vacations to Aspen, always with the caption, "Our golden family." They looked so happy, so untouchable. But I could see the cracks they were trying to hide. I knew Richard's business was hemorrhaging cash, and Colton was more interested in bottle service than bottom lines. I was building a skyscraper while they were burning down their foundation just to keep the lights on. By year 5, I had graduated at the top of my class and secured a position at one of the most aggressive private equity firms in Chicago. But I didn't stop there. I started my own boutique real estate holding company under an LLC they would never recognize. I spent 1,825 days being invisible, working until my eyes bled and my bones ached. I didn't need a mother's approval or a stepbrother's laughter. I needed leverage, and slowly, silently, I began buying up the distressed debt of small logistics firms in the tri-state area. By the time I was 27, I had achieved a level of success that Eleanor couldn't even fathom. I had a view of the skyline from my own office, and for the first time in 5 years, I didn't smell like motor oil or mildew. I smelled like victory. But I wasn't finished. You don't just survive in exile, you end it on your own terms. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It was tucked between a corporate tax filing and a merger agreement, looking completely out of place in its ivory envelope with gold leaf trim. I didn't even have to open it to know who it was from. Eleanor always had a flair for expensive stationery, even when she was drowning in debt. I sat at my desk, the air conditioning humming a steady, expensive tune, and pulled out the card. Eleanor and Richard Vance invite you to celebrate 10 years of love and family. Love and family. The words felt like a joke, written in a language I no longer spoke. There was a small handwritten note on the back of the card in my mother's stiff, practiced cursive. It said, "Maya, we haven't heard from you in years, but we're told you're still struggling in the city. Come to the gala. It might do you some good to see what real success looks like. Colton is being named Entrepreneur of the Year by the local chamber. Don't worry about a gift. Your presence and a clean outfit are enough." She was still doing it. Even after 5 years of silence, she was still trying to manage my failure, to make herself feel superior. She wanted me there as a prop, a foil to Colton's manufactured greatness. She wanted to look at her broken daughter and feel like a saint for inviting her back into the fold. I looked at the invitation, then I looked at the manila folder sitting on my desk, the one I'd been compiling for 18 months. That folder contained the deed to their ranch-style house, which had been sold in a private auction after Richard missed 4 consecutive payments. It contained the proof that Colton's Entrepreneur of the Year award was bought with a donation from a bank account that was currently $200,000 in the red. And most importantly, it contained the evidence of the signature Eleanor had forged on my father's life insurance policy to pay for that silver silk gown she was planning to wear. I realized then that the timing was perfect. They weren't just inviting me to a party, they were inviting me to their own downfall. They wanted a servant to witness their coronation, but they were about to get a CEO who was there to evict them. My mother wanted to show me real success, while I was going to show her the cost of betrayal. I picked up the phone and called my lead attorney. I said, "Prepare the paperwork for the Vance foreclosure. I'm going to an anniversary party, and I want to make sure I bring the most memorable gift in the room." I wasn't going back for an apology. I was going back for the keys to the kingdom. The valet at the Peninsula Hotel didn't blink when I pulled up in a charcoal gray sedan that cost more than my mother's first house. I stepped out, the Chicago wind whipping my hair across my face, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt focused. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored navy suit, the one Eleanor once said I would look like a bank teller. Funny how her insults always felt like blueprints for my success. I walked through the revolving glass doors, my heels striking the polished granite with a sound like a ticking clock. The lobby smelled of expensive lilies and desperation. I knew that at the top of this hotel, in a private ballroom, a group of people was celebrating a life built on the bones of my inheritance. When I pushed open the double oak doors of the ballroom, the music didn't stop, but the air in the room certainly shifted. I didn't creep in. I didn't look for a corner to hide in. I walked straight towards the head table where Eleanor, Richard, and Colton were holding court. Eleanor was in the middle of a laugh, her silver silk gown shimmering under the chandeliers, when her eyes caught mine. The laugh died in her throat, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated annoyance. It wasn't shock yet. It was the look you give a fly that has interrupted a high-end dinner. "Maya?" she said, her voice carrying that sharp, brittle edge that used to make me flinch. She didn't stand up. She didn't offer a hug. She just looked at me up and down, her gaze pausing on my suit, then my shoes. "I told you to wear something nice, dear. I suppose that's the best a clerk can manage on a city salary. Richard, look, the prodigal waitress has returned." Richard snickered, leaning back in his chair with a glass of scotch. "I hope you didn't come here to ask for a loan, Maya. Colton's big night is expensive enough as it is." Colton sat there, looking every bit the golden boy they had spent 5 years polishing. He looked at me with a smirk that told me he still remembered the sound of my mother's hand hitting my face. Hey, Maya, long time no see. Did you finally finish that community college degree, or are you still just finding yourself in a studio apartment? The guests nearby began to whisper. I could hear the words failure and troublemaker floating through the air. They were looking at me with that toxic mix of pity and disdain that Eleanor had spent years cultivating. She wanted me to be the foil to Colton's greatness, the broken daughter who proved how perfect the rest of them were. I didn't answer them, not yet. I just stood there, my hand resting lightly on the manila folder. I watched my mother's hand shake as she reached for her wine glass. She was trying to maintain the performance, the regal matriarch in front of her friends, but she could see the stillness in me. I wasn't the girl who cried in the rain. I was the person who had spent 1,825 days studying their weaknesses. I was the one who had watched them from the shadows while I built a fortress. I'm not here for a loan, Richard, I said, my voice low and steady. And I'm certainly not here to ruin the atmosphere. I'm just here to make sure the records are accurate. I pulled out a chair, one that hadn't been set for me, and sat down. The silence around the table was absolute. The waiter tried to bring out the main course, but Eleanor waved him away, her face flushed with a mounting rage. She stood up, clinking a spoon against her crystal glass. The room went quiet. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced, her voice trembling with a fake theatrical emotion. "To my son, Colton. Today, he's being recognized as a leader in the industry. He's shown what hard work and family loyalty can achieve. Unlike some," she paused, her eyes darting to me with a sneer, "who choose to throw away their opportunities and live in the gutter, Colton has built something that lasts. He's the future of this family." The guests began to clap, but I stood up before the first cheer could erupt. I didn't raise my glass. I raised the manila folder. "It's interesting you mention building things that last, Eleanor, because I've spent the last few months looking at exactly what Colton has built, and it looks a lot like a house of cards." Richard stood up, his face turning a deep shade of red. "Sit down, Maya. You're embarrassing yourself." "No, Richard," I replied, opening the folder. "I'm clarifying the record." I pulled out the first document, a termination letter on corporate letterhead. "Colton, you tell everyone you're a senior partner at Vantage Logistics, but this letter says you were fired 4 months ago for gross negligence and embezzlement of company funds. It seems your entrepreneurial spirit included skimming from the payroll." The room gasped. Colton's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure terror. Eleanor gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. "That's a lie! You forged that!" she screamed. "I didn't have to forge it, Mom. I'm the one who signed it. Because 6 months ago, my holding company purchased Vantage Logistics. I'm the CEO of the firm that kicked Colton out of his office, and I'm the one who authorized the forensic audit of his accounts." I turned to Richard, who was now leaning against the table for support. "And Richard, about that $1 million loan you took out against the house to fund Colton's next big idea, the one you used my late father's life insurance policy to guarantee, I bought that debt too. In fact, I bought the entire mortgage." I pulled out the final deed, the one with the county recorder's stamp. "You threw me out in the rain 5 years ago for refusing to polish Colton's shoes. You told me I didn't belong under your roof. Well, Eleanor, it's not your roof anymore. As of 9 a.m. this morning, I'm the legal owner of the Sycamore Court property. I'm not here to ask for an apology. I'm here to give you 30 days to pack your bags. You wanted me to see real success? This is it. It's the sound of a daughter who stopped believing your lies and started buying your debts." I laid the deed on the white tablecloth, right in front of her silver silk dress. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. My mother looked at the paper, then at me, and for the first time in my life, she didn't have a single word to say. Eleanor's face did that thing I'd seen 1,000 times, the pivot from arrogance to victimhood. "Maya, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I only did what I thought was best. I was scared." I didn't flinch. "You weren't scared, Eleanor. You were calculated. You used your father's money to buy Colton's affection while I slept next to the furnace." Richard reached for my arm, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said. The foreclosure is final. My lawyers will send the formal eviction notice tomorrow morning. You have 30 days to find a life you can actually afford." One by one, the guests began to leave. Their faces turned away. The Golden family was exposed, standing in a ballroom that had suddenly become very cold. They were no longer the masters. They were just tenants in my history. I walked out of that hotel and into the cool Chicago night, feeling lighter than I had in 5 years. People often ask me if the revenge felt good. The truth? It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like an audit. The numbers finally balanced. I used to think family was a circle you were born into, but I know now it's a table you choose to set. My mother told me I had the hands of a servant, but it turns out those hands were perfectly capable of building an empire. If you're being told today that you aren't enough, or if you're being pushed into the rain, don't give up. Count your dollars, count your days, and build your own roof. Subscribe if you're ready to start building. Tell me in the comments, what was the moment you finally stood up? I read everyone. For the first time in my life, I am home.